So today is the maiden voyage of the Monique Marvez show, and I'm super excited because I've had a lot of time to think about it. It's been over a year and a half since I sort of ended Talk of Our Times, and it sort of wrapped up in the summer of 2021 as we were shifting into a different feeling about COVID. We were kind of settling in for the shakedown, okay, how's this going to end? How are we going to land? What's the toll going to be? What's the fee going to be to get off the ship of the damned? Like, what's going to happen here? So that being said, I was very much shaken by the death of my younger brother, and there just wasn't a whole lot more I had to say about our times, because COVID was a moment in time, and that moment imbued the rest of our lives and informed the rest of our lives with a particular mindset that for me was accelerated and condensed sort of in the phrase, life is short, death is sure. And I live by that. I say it all the time. Life is short, death is sure. And I don't say it with any, sorrow, melancholy, negativity. Sometimes I want to just say it like a cheerleader, like, go team. Life is short, death is sure. Go team. Because that's how I feel. It's become sort of my mantra that gets me going. And my energy level has been inexhaustible the last 90 days. We're not even at the end of the first quarter of this year. I don't even know how many cruises, how many flights. I took 7 flights in the last 10 days and performed, 14 shows in 3 cities on 2 coasts. Like it's been amazing. The year and a half since I've sat down and had a long chat with you guys. And when I say with producer Dan, we're going to just call him Dan the Man, because producer Stanton is producer Stanton, and he's on board. So we're getting the band back together. And at some point when the show expands, sound guy Tony will be in. So we are getting the band back together to take the whole thing next level. So both producer Stanton and Dan the Man are watching the feed to see what you guys have to say in real time. And he'll let me know, like, hey, so-and-so's on and has something to say about the content. So, we're going to name the shows because they're going to have a theme, because that's how my mind works. My mind is like a centrifuge. It like magnetically pulls things together and says like, oh, that reminds me of this, and nothing happens in a vacuum, and that happened, and that informed that. And if you look back, you knew that was going to happen by that. And I'll give you a for instance. I'm going to give you a small for instance. The show today is called As It Was, and that is because the number 1 song on the hits station of Sirius XM, which is sort of like, in your hometown, whatever year, like we have, iHeartRadio, and then I believe our big station in LA for what they call Hot AC, which is adult contemporary. These labels are ridiculous because they were made up, 35 years ago to coincide with the arbitrage. But let's say the AC station back in the day is Kiss. And Dan, is that still true? I don't listen to radio.
I don't listen much either.
Yeah, Dan doesn't know either. And I remember a million years ago when Ryan Seacrest was the morning drive guy on the Hot AC station. Well, that is no more. But let's just say hits, what young people are listening to, what the kids are down with, is a song by Harry Styles called As It Was. And I love that song. And we're not allowed to play it or a snippet of it because this show is a little bit different than Talk of Our Times, and we don't want anybody getting angry with us even if we play a YouTube clip of it. But the song is called As It Was. Do yourself a favor. Take a listen. I always like songs that have loud bells, like Viva La Vida by Coldplay I like bells, gongs, loud noises in songs because it makes them sound. Remember Chamawamba, I Get Knocked Down, and at the end they had, basically the Hallelujah chorus came in at the end of I Get Knocked Down, but I Get Up Again. Tub Thumpers, that was the name of the song. You would think they would name it something easy to find if you were trying to buy it. See, that song came out in 97. Now it would be all about SEO searches. Nobody is looking for hashtag Tub Thumpers, hashtag Chumbawamba. But I think As It Was is a very good hashtag. The song is amazing, and it talks about how nothing is the same, how these institutions have crumbled, how they were already going down and COVID accelerated. Now when people's bosses say, you got to go back to work, we're working a 3.5-day work week in the office. You get to leave at lunchtime Thursday. People are like, I don't want to go in the office. I don't want to wear pants again. Like they're really, really wrapped around the axle that they have to go back to regular work so that they can get their regular pay. Like, can you imagine if I said, like, I don't want to stand on stage and wear a bra and lipstick. I want to do Zooms. But no, I'm just the opposite. I've been running up every gangway. They're like, oh, you're getting on a ship full of COVID. Woohoo! There's people on it. So I'm delighted that things are not as they were, but the parts that are good. We have jobs. We have people waiting for us to do what we did. We're just doing it in a different way. And the song was the theme of the week. But for the same money, the theme of the week could have been, more like a sinister film noir podcast, like Serial. And it could have been Evil Always Overplays Its Hand. Now, anybody who's a fan of me knows that my dad is, my dad. He wasn't just my father. He was my idol, my mentor. In many ways, I was his muse and he was mine. He was a brilliant man. And he would always bring me joy by reminding me that evil always overplays its hand. Now, I'm not even sure how to apply that to certain things that happened as a child. And by the way, I'm getting notifications that Hector Baez, who is a super fan and a dear friend, is posting links to things in real time so people can watch as it was when they get a moment. And, Hector, my brother from another mother, or, whatever, who knows? With me and 23, we could actually really be related. It's not me and 23, it's 23 and me, or whatever. Let's just call it Grandma Lied, because you just don't know who's going to show up. Somebody gave me one as a gift and I haven't taken it because I'm like, my dad used to get around. I'm just afraid. I don't need any more siblings. I'm down one, but the one I have left is challenging, so I don't need another one till I get it worked out with this one, who I love dearly. So, thank you, Hector, and let me get back to my father with Evil Always Overplays Its Hand. The first time that I was aware of the world around me was earlier than the age of 7, which is what the French call the age of reason. And I have a chapter in my book, which I'll start to share readings of, excerpts of on this very show. And the book's called It's Not Unusual. And there's a chapter, and Hay House made me change the name to Not Skinny, Not Blonde. And Hector found the old book cover that's on Amazon. Even though I never finished the book, it's still there. And people are, from time to time, say, how do I buy the book? It's like, I'm writing it now. Be patient. So when I was a little girl, before the age of 7, and the chapter in the book is called The 7-Up Theory, because I believe that everything we do from the age of 7 and up is to heal or protect a wound that we incurred from the age of 7 and down. And even if that were not true, it's just a snappy title, The 7-Up Theory. But then when I researched it, the number 7 in children is biblical. There's passages in the Bible about when children reach the age of 7, and the French call it the age of reason. But well before I was 7, at the age of 5, the Vietnam War was raging in, Vietnam and in our consciousness. We watched Walter Cronkite. My father watched the news. I heard things in the background of my childhood and words, and the My Lai massacre, and all of these things were like in the back of my mind. And I really didn't understand as a 5-year-old what any of these things really meant. But what brought it home was that I had a babysitter named Misha Yaros. And I can say this because Misha's a fan, and I hope he's listening, who found me many years later when I was on KFI and sent me an email, and I told him he was my first big crush, and it meant a lot to him. So when I was a very little girl in 1967, Misha wasn't babysitting me, but somebody else was babysitting me, and Misha's younger brother, Stuart, who was my age. And Stuart informed me, and this is exactly what he said, and this is when I first became aware of news and current events. Stuart said, there's a war over where they make the Chinese food, and Misha's going to have to go over there, and he might die. And I didn't even know what that meant, because to me the Chinese food was Coral Gables. We lived in Coconut Grove. But he said it so emphatically and with so much, melancholy and alarm mixed together that I was terrified. And when I realized that my beloved Misha might disappear, whether it was Coral Gables or Vietnam mattered little to me, I couldn't stop crying. So when my father came home from his fancy 1967 dinner with my mom, who was no doubt wearing a Poochie print caftan, I was inconsolable. And I couldn't explain to him why I was so afraid and upset until I finally was able to repeat through my hysteria, Misha is going to have to go where they make the Chinese food, and he might be killed. And my father, being brilliant, already understood that I had connected what I'd overheard on the television set and a different culture in a different place in a different part of the world and my beloved Misha. And he connected all the dots. And he said, don't worry, Monique. Evil always overplays his hand. Those people over there where the Chinese food is, he didn't even try to inform me. He said, they're bad people and it's going to be okay and nothing's going to happen to Misha. And I believed him. I always believed him. Even though when I was older and I knew he used to lie on the reg, I still believed him. Well, Misha didn't go and he lived, and now you know that he's still alive and we've been in touch. But I was aware of things. I understood news. I understood there were good people and bad people. I understood that there were conflicts and controversies that were historical and didn't need to make me hysterical. And I moved on from that point. And as I grew older, because the Vietnam War raged until I was in 7th grade. It ended when I was in 7th grade, and Richard Nixon ended it. And that's how long it went. I understood utterly and completely what was going on. And I had a very strong feeling in my chest when I saw the now iconic photograph of the last people leaving. There's an iconic photograph of the last Americans reaching from the top of, I believe, an embassy building, trying to grab on to the helicopter that is leaving. And that was the backdrop of my childhood and early adolescence. And throughout my life, the backdrop of my belonging has been that I'm always the only one surrounded by, successful, smarter, whiter men. Something about the way my brain works always puts me in a position where I'm the only one. And I'm going to explain to you how that works, because I'm sure that if you look at your own life, there's a lot of ways in which you're the only one, which is why the book is called It's Not Unusual, because everybody's life is not unusual to them because it's the only life you know. So I'll give you a for instance. As a child in 1972, it was a leap year, and George McGovern was running for president. And my teacher, Audrey MacArthur, I hope she hears me and finds me because I love her, went up to the front of this schoolroom with a globe, and I could just picture it. She had a globe, and she had this beautiful, big long flashlight, and she was all ready to shine the light and spin the globe and tell us the story of why we have leap year. It was a leap year, 1972. And she said, does anybody know why we have leap year? And I'm sure when she asked the question, she thought it was a rhetorical question. My my hand shot up and I said, because we're told, our calendar is set up that it's a 24-hour day. But in fact, it's 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.1 seconds, leaving us with a quarter of a day at the end of the year. Well, she was not expecting that. And even though I gave her an intelligent and informed answer, she still pinned a note to my chest, because that's what you did to kids. You pinned a note to their chest so they wouldn't lose it or get the information wrong. And the note was that I was going to be able to be tested potentially for a gifted program. And within that gifted program, I was the minority females. There were very few females. Females were in the minority, and I was a minority female within the group, being Latina. And by the way, I didn't know that Jews were a minority until I was in 10th grade, because all of the places my life took me, I was surrounded by smart Jewish kids. So I had no idea that they were a minority until a little ways down the road. Now, I just thought that that was the system. That's the way it is, that a certain group of people get to make decisions for other groups of people. And Lord help us if they're evil, if they're not fair, if they're not kind, if they don't do the right thing. But I always had faith, because my dad said evil always overplays its hand. And I believe it, and I've been on this planet long enough to know that it's true. Because evil, now keep in mind, I'm not saying if you have a strong ego that you're evil, but the ego is a hungry child. It's never satisfied. And most people that are evil are driven by incredible insecurities that need a constant level of satisfaction. It's like a drug. They have to have, they're energy vampires. They have to subjugate others, and they have to get over on others. And it's not even that they could make more money doing the right thing, but they like making money screwing other people over, because it's not even about the money. It's the energetic charge they get in subjugating and harming another human. And a lot of people like that have existed throughout history. The history will show you that there's always that guy. But I'm here to tell you, and by the way, put a pin in it, I'm very curious to see how the Ukraine will end, because if you Google how do most dictators die, it's never asleep in their bed. Never. Except for Fidel Castro, who was just a Russian puppet anyway. Ceausescu. Sorry about that, 3:30 people. I have to lean forward because now I have to lean you on a book. Time out. 1 second. All right. To bad ink. Producer Dan, I'm going to let you handle that, Dan the man. But there's the camera. We can figure out how to lean it on something. They don't have to have the most perfect shot. So the upshot is, back to YouTube. I apologize, but I was trying to hang out with some friends simultaneously. If you look at, just in my lifetime, Saddam Hussein, before me, Stalin, I'm not even sure what happened. I know Stalin was hung. Hitler killed himself. Anyway, the upshot is, according to my dad, evil always overplays its hand, and I've lived long enough to know that that is a fact. That is a truth. That is what happens. So now we get to the heart, to the exciting part. And I have to ask Dan, if you have anything you need to add, Dan, just feel free, because I'm on a roll. I've been thinking about this a long time. I have been fascinated. And keep in mind, I've been hearing about this since a long time ago, since the summer of last year, I think, was when the incidents really started to unravel. That Alex Murdaugh, and it's pronounced Murdaugh, but everybody pronounces it different. I've watched 2 different documentaries, and there's like 5 different pronunciations, but they themselves pronounce it Murdaugh, even though it's spelled Murdaugh. And I want you to know that there's 2 different documentaries about these people. One of them is on Netflix, and one of them is on HBO Max. They're both fascinating. But before I even bothered to watch the documentaries, docudramas, which is recent, I just watched those recently, I had sort of been intermittently following the case because this person came to our consciousness and became a national news story by a foiled, just completely, I can't even, fumbled. I'm trying to think of the right word because it was a boondoggle. Like I could go through synonyms and I wouldn't find the right word. Suicide attempt. Like he got his drug dealer slash hobo, forest dwelling dirtbag buddy to try and shoot him in the head on a highway so that he could leave his remaining alive son $10 million in insurance. And boy, does he know how to rip off insurance. So as you look at the onion of what is Alex Murdaugh and the unraveling of a dynasty that for 100 years terrorized the low country of the Carolinas in every possible form. They terrorized them from the judicial bench. They terrorized them from the law firm. They had deep ties into a local bank, Lafitte Bank. Alex Murdaugh single-handedly took down 3 prominent, menacing, subjugating, old white guy institutions in the span of no time. Because things work until they don't. Evil always overplays its hand. So I'm going to give you the high points because I want you to watch the documentaries. You don't need to. I can tell you what occurred, and it wouldn't ruin it for you. Because in a million years, I couldn't give you the details. You could go down your own rabbit holes and research the banks like I did and research his law partner who was still trying to defend him on his murder trial, saying, yes, he has a drug habit that was hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in drugs. And yes, he's stolen millions of dollars in insurance settlements. And yes, he's almost destroyed our law firm. But he's not a murderer. I draw the line at murderer. Well, guess what, boys and girls? He's most certainly a murderer. He was convicted, I can say that. And because of all the things that have been brought to light, suddenly they're saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe their housekeeper didn't actually trip over a hound dog and fall on the concrete steps in front of their house and bleed to death. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe a young man who was found in the middle of the road with no glass, no skid marks, blunt trauma to his face, and his shoes still on. Because usually when you get hit by a vehicle, your shoes come off, even if they're tied tightly. But most certainly loose shoes come off. By the way, they're excavating that body. And they're looking into it. Because the one remaining Murdaugh who is alive and right now not disgraced, although certainly under a cloud of suspicion, is Buster Murdaugh. And he's the only one left who hasn't been killed or charged with something egregious. And most certainly he had something to do. This young man, his name was Stephen, and he was a very outward, flamboyant, delightful by all accounts, popular by all accounts, and most certainly to be, I don't want to say respected, but accepted in that community as an out and very visible homosexual. You got to have some kind of winning personality. Well, his twin sister, first of all, what a brave young woman Stephen's twin sister is, because she said in one of the documentaries that she insisted that his funeral have an open casket. And she said on the documentary that half of his face was still beautiful, and he was very handsome, adorable child. The other half is destroyed, blunt force object. Not a truck. But all of the paperwork, there was one policeman who was saying, this is not a hit or run, this is foul play. But of course the Murdaughs swooped in. They had the sheriff's department in their pocket, and the paperwork was doctored. And even when the policeman began to ask questions, people said, well, those are the Murdaughs. Good luck with that. But evil always overplays its hand. and nothing is the same as it was. I want to wrap up the Murdaugh because then I want to go into the next thing, which is how much, as it was, how much things have changed. Now, wrapping up Eric Murdaugh, let me just tell you this, which is he's in jail for the rest of his life, Alex Murdaugh. His son Buster is loose and living in an apartment, I believe in Hilton Head with his girlfriend. But again, he's going to be under a cloud of suspicion here very, very shortly. And in less than 18 months, they have brought down huge, entrenched in the community, all powerful, all subjugating, terrifying to anyone that crossed their paths institutions. Because evil overplays its hand. Now, let's get to the music industry. A lot of people, sort of, I guess because of his origin in Wham, I think a lot of people marginalize or don't take as seriously as any other pop star. I think George Michael sometimes falls into the same category as, let's say, a Cyndi Lauper, who, although a fantastic musician, who certainly, after Girls Just Want to Have Fun, continued to have a career and popped up again on our radar as a Broadway performer, and I believe won a Tony for Kinky Boots. But George Michael, in 1984, was the highest selling pop star on the planet. And if you go back and really research him, which I don't have to, by the way, I've been an enormous fan since the first time I saw George Michael. Literally, I remember watching MTV in the summer of '84, and he was singing Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, and a shirt that said Choose Life, and he had this incandescence. It wasn't just the way he sang, it wasn't the dance moves, it was just something, a quality that thrilled me. The song was kind of a silly song. I don't really like the song. It's okay. But I liked him. And I called my girlfriend Katie, and this used to be a joke in my act, because I called Katie and I said, have you seen this video? Because remember MTV, 84, 85, 86. Like if you were alive and had a television set in America, you were watching MTV. And she was like, oh, he's all right. I was like, are you kidding me? He's amazing. He's beautiful. He's a star. And she was like, well, he's gay. And I was like, so? Like I really had a shot at George Michael. By the way, I was married anyway. But the point I'm making is like, she goes, yeah, that's why they call the group Wham, because as soon as they leave the stage, they're on each other. Wham. Like she was always that kind of person. I was always trying to ruin my fun. But I saw something in him that was amazing and was hooked. I was hooked. From the first love at first sight, I was hooked. And, he had I'm Your Man, and he kept Careless Whisper. Like, Wham was Wham. But I don't even know the other guy's name. I think it's Andrew Ridgeley. But George Michael has been somebody that I've watched and adored and admired forever. And I saw a documentary on it was an MTV produced documentary right about the time he was taking control of his solo career, and basically saying, you turn your life over to these people that swear they know everything and they're going to help you. And 10 or 15 minutes into a conversation, you realize they don't know anything and they're not going to help you. And there was something about the authenticity and the strength behind that statement that made me respect him even more as a human than I did as a musician. And that's saying a lot. And then, of course, we had freedom. We had freedom. And if you don't know that video, because I've recently just gone crazy showing it to everyone I know under the age of 40, including my nieces, Sony Music had him under contract that was, ridiculous. I mean, I'm hesitant to use certain words so that I don't offend anyone, but it was, draconian. Let's just say draconian. A contract in which it was almost impossible for him to, even though he was selling record after record after record, to become wealthy and and autonomous, and comfortable in his creativity. And he said, well, if you're not going to let me do that, then I'm not going to promote the record. They're not going to see me. So on the album, the next album after Faith, which I don't have to tell you about Faith, 1984, he was the biggest selling pop star on planet Earth. Period. Full stop. Because you got to have faith, the faith, the faith. If he was singing to us about having faith, he was losing his quickly and becoming very disheartened and pretty crushed. So he came out with an album called Listen Without Prejudice, because the backstory is that he didn't want you to listen to that album coming from your expectation of faith, that you're gonna get these great poppy songs and, you know, sing along. They were deep. They were reflective. They were, I have all of this success, and to what end? And one of the songs on the album is called Praying for Time. And it's an amazing song. And I see it sort of as our generation's Imagine, John Lennon's Imagine. And I'm not overstating that. When you hear the song or even read the lyrics, it was amazing. And then he made Freedom, and he did not appear. But he was so brilliant that there were 5 supermodels on the cover of British Vogue. At that time, Stephen Meisel, the famed fashion photographer, had dubbed them the Ugly Sisters, because this was the height of supermodeldom in the 80s, and these were the pinnacle. These were like astronauts. There were only 5 of them on the planet that looked this way. Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell. You go down to Christy Turlington, Nadja Auerman, can't remember the 5th one, forgive me, Cindy Crawford. I think it was Cindy Crawford. And he had these women lip syncing in his video because he would not show his beautiful face. And even without him, the song was an incredible, record crushing hit. And the video was on constant rotation on MTV. Well, flash forward, he decides to sue Sony in court in England. And after a very long soul-crushing time, spoiler alert, I'm sure you already know this, he lost. And the judge told him, "You're not wrong. These are not fair conditions, but I can't rule with you, because if I rule with you, then every other recording contract on earth comes into question." Now, when you look in terms of today, think of Napster. Think of how the Digital Rights Act basically empowered people like Spotify and Pandora to have a whole nother level of thievery, a whole nother level of power, of subjugation, of the ability to take from people and own their IP and steal their IP. It's fascinating to me that these systems just keep doubling down and changing faces and masks and incarnations, but they're the same evil. They're the same control. They have the same mechanisms in place. Now, George Michael died of various complications of poor health, pneumonia, alcoholism, drug addiction. And I guarantee you that fight for his musical life, for his creative life, probably killed him much more than the drugs or the alcohol. I think it was probably heartbreak. But he continued to do the best he could with his music. And I actually saw him a few years before he died. And you could see he was wearing the sorrow. And the news stories made him kind of, a joke, a punchline. He was in my act as well. And I'm not even going to tell you the joke, because now that he's gone, I feel sorry that it was in my act. Maybe I will tell you. He was caught propositioning an undercover cop in Will Rogers State Park. And the irony is that Will Rogers' motto was, "I never met a man I didn't like." There was more to the joke than that, but that's the part I don't feel bad telling you. But he had a series of just mishaps and, bordering on the comical until we lost him. And there's a documentary now called George Michael Uncut. And it was, he cooperated with it and was very much a part of it. And it was being made in 2016. It came out in 2017 posthumously because we lost him Christmas Day of 2016. And I say we lost him because the world lost a super talent and a bright light. No different than when I was on KFI and I could play music on the show because it was part of iHeart, so I could play whatever I wanted and not worry about copyright infringement. I would regularly play Queen as bumper music and say we lost Freddie Mercury right around Thanksgiving of 91, November of 91, and I still miss him every day. Now, I'm very interested to see, and I guarantee you, I promise you on the most personal level, that there are things in motion. There's energies afoot. There's things that are being accelerated that are going to free the creator, that are going to free the musicians, the artists, the comedians. Because interestingly enough, as in the real world, I don't know that there's a word for the real world other than the real world. I know that there's blockchain money, and that's Bitcoin and Ethereum, and they call that Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then they call the green paper, which is what I call it, fiat money. So in the real world, where there's fiat money, that it's interesting to me to see how everything's kind of been moved around and people get canceled, and you're very concerned about what you say because you could get canceled. Here's my take on cancellation once and for all, because I get asked all the time. As a comedian, people say, aren't you worried about being canceled? No. Here's categorically not. And I don't self-censor and I don't govern myself. I say what I'm going to say. And I'm not PC on purpose. I think one of the reasons that people don't take umbrage with my act, although I do say some edgy things from time to time, I have been known to use the word vegetarist, is because in my heart, I genuinely care for people. It's not an act. I genuinely love people. I genuinely want my comedy to lift their spirits or at the very least distract them. It is always my intention to leave my audience better than I found them. And if I make a misstep, I think they forgive me because intentions are everything. Everybody knows that when a Southerner says, bless his little heart, they're really saying, die, you gravy-sucking pig. I think we know that. So I don't worry. But here's what cancellation means to me, and I'm not worried about it, is that people, famous people, are quote-unquote made by the man. That corporations give them money to do endorsements or to make movies or to represent their brand or whatever you want to say. And this happened to Gilbert Gottfried when he had Aflac. And after there was a tsunami in Japan, he made some disparaging remarks about the Japanese people, and Aflac dropped him. This was way before quote-unquote canceling was a thing. He was canceled for saying negative things about Japanese people after the tsunami. And so what happens is that you're yourself, whatever you are. And I don't know about musicians, but the formula for comedy is tragedy plus time. And a lot of comedians are not whole and holy people. They've got some hitches in their giddy up. They have some sorrows. They have some things they carry. They have baggage. Get a magazine rack. We got issues, baby. Well, I'm no different, other than the fact that I didn't want to be that way. I wanted to be able to remember the hitches in my giddy up in order to be relatable and to launch from there. But I didn't want them to hinder me or hamper me, or most certainly imbue my comedy with a certain level of bitterness or sarcasm or irony. I'm not that person. And anybody who knows me personally knows that I'm not. Now, I haven't been blessed yet with being, sponsored and made by corporations. I'm looking forward to it. I want it to happen because they're going to be very happy with me, because I'm not going to put them in a position of having to take back their support by being canceled. But here's what I want to tell you about some people that have been canceled. It's not fair to take back something you gave someone when you knew who you were dealing with. You know, a lot of my friends ask me, what do you think about this comedian or that comedian? And I'm not going to name names and I'm not going to give opinions. What I will tell you is, if you watch that person's act, it doesn't take a genius to see that they have an edge to them, or that they're prejudiced, or that they're making a particular kind of comment that could be, you know, misogynistic, anti-Semitic, you know, racist, whatever. It's not like people hide who they are. They don't, and especially not comedians. It's that when they're popular enough, when they're funny enough, we're in the zeitgeist enough to overcome the red flags, then people throw money at them. I don't know if you guys recall when Don Imus was fired unceremoniously for referring to a team of women's basketball players as nappy-headed hoes. That is a direct quote. I didn't say it. Don Imus did. Now, on any other day, he might have survived that comment. He said it over 15 years ago. He said it in the spring of '07. But it was the wrong day. And the wrong people were listening. And Don Imus has always been Don Imus, by the way. However, he was in contract renewal. And his contract was very high. And his ratings were slipping. And he didn't have as many sponsors and advertisers, because radio, as the internet grew, radio shrunk, and the margins on radio shrunk. It used to be the margins were incredible. You just turned on a mic and the money poured in, because you didn't have a backdrop, and you didn't have a gaffer, and you didn't have a best boy, and you didn't have catering. Usually people would show up with free donuts. But he said it at the exact perfect storm moment where everybody wanted him gone. And I know it probably baffles him to this day that that was the end of his career. But it was. And it's interesting for me to watch how on Earth, you know, real life, everybody's so sensitive about this group of people or that group of people, or not saying something, you know, that could be interpreted as, or misunderstood as, or even allude to. And you will lose your sponsorship, your livelihood. You won't be given a second chance. And yet, on social media, to me right now, social media has become the schoolyard. It's the new schoolyard. And it's not just a schoolyard, it's the schoolyard in a bad neighborhood where big kids from other schools show up to bully you. It's not happening, quote unquote, in real life, because God forbid you should fat shame a child in school, or not give fifth place a ribbon, or not acknowledge somebody's pronouns on Earth in real life. But on the internet, it's a free-for-all. It's a virtual Thunderdome. Little girls, you know, pit themselves against each other. My niece Margot called me, I'm going to tell you, 5 years ago this started for her in my life. And she said, you know, Auntie Monique, I'm being bullied on Insta. I'm like, well, you know, that's not real life. Did anybody that make a comment ever meet you in person? Did you go to Starbucks with them? Did they give you a Christmas card? Well, people don't give Christmas cards anymore. Did you exchange Sephora gift cards? Well, the answer was no. I said, well, would you consider maybe deleting your account for a month or two? Heaven forbid I'd be cut off from the world. No. You will have taken yourself out of the schoolyard. You would have put yourself in a position not to be bullied by strangers that hide behind fake weird names. I'm no stranger to this. I did radio in Indianapolis. I'll never forget this, because a guy that was his email address, because that was back when you sent emails to the radio station. You couldn't tweet horrific things about me, you had to email them. And a guy whose email was Pootie Bait. Oh boy, that is drilled in my brain. Evidently, I left a restaurant and undertipped. And he said all kinds of horrific things to me in an email, which I read out loud on the air, by the way, because I couldn't stop laughing. And it could have very well been my third husband because he was cheap. He was tighter than a frog's ass in flight. I'm actually known for being an extravagant, ridiculous tipper. And I remember after Abu Ghraib, I made a comment on the air where I just said how it made me feel as an American. And I was insulted 27 ways from Sunday. Well, they do worse. Well, and I said, I'm not talking about war or politics or torture. I'm merely letting you know as an American how those pictures made me feel. And one of my favorite things to do on the air, and by the way, my show was #1, was to respond dead on to the critics and ask them, do you mind staying on hold? Do you mind staying on? And I would go in break after break after break, but it never took more than 3 breaks for them to say, well, I'm sorry, I misunderstood you, or I misheard you, or I was just angry, or I was upset when I saw the picture. See, as a human, you're going to face challenges with other humans. They're going to do things that make you unhappy. They're sometimes going to take your money. They're sometimes going to misrepresent you. They're sometimes going to outright lie to get their way. But I promise you, on everything I know to be true, that if your intentions are good, if you don't cut corners. I remember my second husband, we'll talk about all this on other shows. My second husband loved The Matrix, as do I. I hadn't watched it yet, actually. I didn't watch it till after we were divorced because he loved it so much. I figured, well, if he loves it, it's got to be not great. Now, isn't that wrong? I'm admitting it now. I'm sorry, Sean. But he loved The Matrix, and he loved the soundtrack. And Napster existed. And he made a mixed disc. That was back when you burnt discs. You didn't even have playlists. He made a disc off of Napster of every song on the soundtrack. He figured out what the songs were. He found them. He burnt them from Napster. He made a disc. He used to make me discs all the time. And we would fight because I would say, I'm a comedian. I have comedy CDs. This was back when I had comedy cassettes. This was before Sound Exchange. This was before Sirius XM. This was just you were hoping to be played on the 5 o'clock funnies on KLOS. And you were hoping to be able to sell your CDs when you went someplace that somebody wanted to hear your new comedy or your cassettes. And as an artist, I would tell him, please don't do that. If there is a soundtrack available for sale, we will drive to the record store because there was no iTunes, and we will buy that record because it is not right to use Napster to take away money from people that are creating something and working hard. See, I'm not worried about being canceled, and I'm not worried about being taken from, because I know that evil always overplays its hand. And if you're a good person with good intentions that stays the course, good things will come to you. It just may take a little longer. And I think, because I do believe in, the hereafter, I believe that George Michael is actually having a moment. The documentary is doing very well. I actually was scrolling through Sirius XM, and they were playing him on there's different channels with different, there's like Mosaic is like easy listening. And there was a day last week where it feels like summer. It's been so hot. There was a day last week where as I scrolled through Sirius XM, different types of his music were being played on 4 or 5 different channels. If you don't think that I take extreme joy from having, new Elton John, which is basically old Elton John retooled with Dua Lipa and Britney Spears. Hold Me Closer is fantastic. The Hold Me, the upbeat Hold Me Closer with Britney Spears is fantastic. And Cold Cold Heart with Dua Lipa. You know what I love is that he answers his younger self. Rocket Man was supposedly a song about somebody who kind of had to hide because his brand wasn't very popular. And he said, I'm not the man they think I am at home. Think about that. But in the new one, Cold Cold Heart, he said, and this is what I should have said. And I thought it, but I kept it hid. All these 50 years later, he's still on top. He's still amazing. He beat drug addiction. He's still making music. And he has the ability to answer himself from a wonderful, wonderful place. Because that's what we can do now. And that's what we should do with everything around us. Because nothing is as it was. I hope you were able to connect all the dots and stay with me. I apologize for the technical errors. I'm sure they'll be fixed. Nothing is as it was, and there's never been a better time to be alive. Thank you for your time and your attention and your energy. I feel you.